Cool. Hello. Thank you guys for coming to NADA. So I'm Kirsten Chen, and I work as a writer for Franchise Magazine, and we're one of the art fair's cultural partners. Right now, we are a really cool basketball art magazine, agency, and gallery in LA. We'll be opening our first permanent space in Chinatown this summer, so keep an eye out. Today I'm here with Bradley Ward, who's a lovely artist from Houston, Texas. We hosted Bradley's exhibition, Too Short to Box with God, in 2019, which was a viral set of glitchy, textured sports scenes that took the form of tapestries, so Bradley's not new to the intersection of sports and art. I think our conversation will be interesting to anyone who's a sports fan, anyone who's noticed the growth of basketball and art in the last 5 years, but more importantly, people who look to sports as a way of understanding human relationships, history, truth, and personal values. Just to start, Bradley, how are you feeling?
It's kind of cold outside, a little rainy, but
Yeah.
good to be here.
Any opinions or disclaimers you want to share about the work you've been making before we dive into it?
Not specifically, but it's going to keep getting bigger and better and more expensive. So
Cool. So today at NADA, we're showing two of Bradley's dry media works or drawings, and they're both of iconic sports scenes. So the first one, Coming to America, is with Bernard King, and then there's Devotion, Souls of Mischief, of a 2001 All-Star game. You have like an encyclopedic knowledge of sports history through research. Do you want to tell us how you came across both of those images?
yeah, I mean it's just collecting different like sports photography or ephemera, keeping all these old slam magazines that I had as a kid, or just like rifling through Tumblr all those years and having files upon files stored on my desktop that laptops crashing, things of that nature. And actually, as Colin, wiki racing, it's the same type of thing, just matriculating data and memories at the same time, and it being something that's ingrained in my family upbringing, and it not being like a stretch to make any of these comparisons, as far as like the earlier work being these old masterpieces and comparing them to these black bodies that are inhabiting the same space, shape, and form. Like, why do you not care about these black bodies, but why do I have to know that David and like Michelangelo and like all this other shit in like the grand white narrative when these other cultures are inhabiting the same space,
Right, and so the Bernard King image kind of has him in an Eddie Murphy Coming to America-esque pose. What sorts of things were you thinking about or pulling from when you created that composition?
It was just me getting back into portraiture, and so it's a pastel drawing, but I was trying to exhibit like something obviously of joy. I'm not interested in my own misery or like the misery of black people. I'm trying to do something that's going to uplift. So for those who don't know, Bernard King was born in New York, went to University of Tennessee, experienced a lot of racism there, and he came back and he was drafted by the Knicks, and it was a joyous time. So it was just something about the idea of importing and exporting, thinking about what is like America's greatest import, black people and our labor. So it was about just several things involving the black body and labor, and my idea of like what is the line between those. Like, even when you're talking about art, is it when you become sentient? Is it a job now, or is it something that you still do out of like the joy of doing it? So basketball's always been a way for me to talk about, a vehicle for me to talk about the idea of labor or like interpersonal relationships. So that's what I was trying to do.
Cool. I think it's really special that Bradley can look at any image from sports history and come to these greater realizations about certain aspects of human life. Like, you're always able to look at like literal sports and the motions or bigger sports movements and organizations amongst players. What are some of these human themes that you're most interested in?
Most recently, it's been about this idea of joy, but also devotion and intimacy within like these fraternal packs. Obviously I'm a man, but men and women play sports, but there's this idea of being able to touch or rely on somebody in a way that you don't normally get to in like different societal means. Having gone to an MFA program and being on a team for the first time in a really long time, then not having that, and obviously the pandemic, us not being able to be together, just this idea of being able to rely on somebody and have that accountability that I didn't get in since I've not been on a team. So it's just this idea of intimacy between men mostly, and I think that's something that we don't really get to talk about or really exhibit outside of things of that nature.
Right. And I remember that when we were talking about your drawing practice, you mentioned that you really enjoy drawing hands of athletes or hands when they're in action or gesturing. Do you want to expand on that idea at all?
Oh, I just think it's like the point of contact for like these ideas of devotion, or like that's how you express that you need somebody or you're supporting somebody. So the hands or any type of point of contact or a hug or just anytime where like these bodies are overlapping, it's the focal point and it's the contact point. And like I was saying, you can touch on another person the way that you aren't really allowed to in these in our everyday settings. You know, it shouldn't necessarily be that way, but that is how it is for most people who play sports, or just most young black men. We don't really like love on each other like that unless we are in the frames of playing a sport like that. So that was how I've experienced it, and I miss my friends. I miss people, and that's how I express that. Yeah.
I love that. And that's so true. Like, once somebody enters a sports game, it gives us a new set of rules and a way for us to interact with each other. On the other hand, I know that you sometimes get really frustrated because people are so in love with your sports-related works that they think that that's what they associate you with. But I was kind of curious as to why sports is an effective way to expand societal understanding through art.
Well, I think it's this idea that you're on a team. Even if you're talking about baseball, it can be extrapolated outside of basketball. Specifically for black and brown people, you know, you're in these individualistic places when you're in these professional environments. You're replaceable. In baseball, if you get subbed out of the game, you don't come back into the game. You are supposed to be on at all times. I think everybody experienced that during the pandemic. But I think that was the first time white people realized what it was like to be on call at all times. You had to act a certain way. You had to be available at all times, and that shit isn't fair. As a black and brown person, you don't get to turn that off. Like I was saying, I equate that to baseball. Basketball, I equate that to devotion and like fraternal relationships, being able to talk to a man in a way that I don't normally get to. And that may be on me as a person for not being able to foster those relationships, but basketball gave me that opportunity. And that's all I'm really saying, and I don't really feel like a lot of people outside of that are looking deeper than the fact that it's just this like nexus of design or like fashion how it is now. Like, people love basketball on the periphery, and that's really cool. But there's a lot of shit that like younger men are working through while they're on that court. It's either an escape for a lot of them, or it's in a way to create agency and express themselves in a way that they don't normally get to. And I just think, you know, it's a lot more than it just being a lot of like design or graphics, and that's annoying to me sometimes.
Totally. And I really appreciate that when we talk about basketball or baseball, you're able to kind of zoom out and look at everyone who is in the culture of this sport more collectively to associate them with like wider themes and stuff. I'm kind of curious if you've observed anything to do with your audience's reaction when it comes to specific sports like baseball or basketball. Is there anything you've noticed?
I'm super into the basketball like fandom and everything, and online. I'm not as closely tied to the baseball one, so when I was making the baseball work, it was interesting how much people gravitated toward that, and I actually loved that because it helped me get away from identifying with specific people like I do with basketball or specific moments, so I don't have to actually focus on maybe the likeness of somebody. I can focus on like the periphery that the point that I'm trying to make. I guess this more specifically answers the question. Not necessarily, but the baseball response was really nice because it felt like people were looking at the work versus the fact that I like am drawing Iverson, or like people asking, where's Jordan? You're not getting a fucking Jordan piece from me, I'm sorry. But, you know, that's how I feel about it.
It's important to not get caught up in the image, and a lot of the time in sports culture, people are so motivated by images and ads and celebrity endorsements. But cool. So just bringing it back to the drawings, you talk about labor, you talk about motion and movements and interacting with people. But I think it's really interesting that you still choose to work in drawing, which is a still medium. Let's talk about your relationship to drawing and how you capture rhythm or motion with this stillness.
Yeah, I think my relationship to drawing is always evolving. Even coming across like information from Greg Tate and Arthur Jafa in the past couple of years, the idea of rhythm, um, the things you do during a day, or like the actual like cadence you have when you're doing anything, and even the drawings. Like I'm not fully there when I'm doing them. I'm allowing it to do, allowing it to inform itself. So the idea of like keeping that rhythm, and the moment I'm like cognizant, I step away from it. So it's just the idea of trying to stay in between the space where it's informing itself and I'm obviously enjoying myself, but not trying to overthink it too much and learning to step away. So it's just constantly about knowing myself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that whenever we have conversations about your drawing, there's a lot of pretty specific terms that you use. You like to use dry media, you like to use
Yeah.
mark making. I think these are all really important to consider the gestures and textures within your work. There's also a lot of layers. So thinking about all these gestures, these glitches, these textures, what are some of the ideas that you're trying to convey through that?
With the glitches, it was mostly about like trying to remain a truth teller. Like, most of these iconic sports images are taken by a handful of white people. So I thought if I scan that image and I move it at least not even a centimeter on the scanner, it's no longer the same image. And then thinking about who gets to tell whose history, or who gets to be visible, and like who gets to make those rules. And I just feel like sports in general hasn't been able to be told by the people who are actually making the history. So that's what that is with those. But as far as mark making, I just wanted to look into who I felt like I not mirrored, but was akin to. And I felt like, a little bit of Impressionism, Mary Cassatt, Bert Marisol, like those are two women that I actually absolutely love, and I want to be able to lean a little bit more into that. So it's about just trying to remain true to the history, but also being able to like tie in other things that elongate the history. It help create different entry points for people. So that's what it's about for me.
Cool. And I'm always really curious about these deep investigations that you'll do about specific moments in sports history or specific figures. And throughout all your research, do you think that sports is more truthful or more deceptive than the average fan is aware of?
I think it's more truthful because, outside of Bo Jackson, I don't think there's a single athlete where like you can't look up what they did. Bo Jackson is probably the closest thing we have to a tall tale in the past 40 years. Like everything he did was unbelievable, but he did it all before we really had a whole lot of like video footage of things. But everything else, it's absolutely true. Like even kids who don't understand Michael Jordan. We just had the Last Dance documentary, and everything about that's true. So
Yeah.
Magic Johnson just had a documentary that's on Apple TV right now. Everything about sports is true, and that's the best part about it. Shit is unbelievable, but that's what moves us.
Right. Cool. And within your drawings, there's the hands, there's the lines, there's the marks. There's a lot of different elements within one of your drawings. So do you have any tips for viewers when they're looking at your work and how they can read between these lines to get the deeper message? Are there any focal points, any color things, or other visual elements?
That's actually a great question. I've never thought about that, other than like watch sports.
Yeah.
But I guess in general, not even specifically about sports, like open up like the things you're influenced by. It doesn't need to necessarily be these white cube gallery spaces. It doesn't need to be all these antiquated history books. There's a lot of things happening in real time that are breaking a lot of records or like surpassing the history we've had, and a lot of younger information that is not only much more tangible but impactful, and it leans on the other things. So I just think in general, just be more receptive to things. That's pretty much it.
Totally. I love that you can make artwork every day and still be motivated to participate in the things that you're interested in. Where was I going with this? Cool. So, do you think that there's any cultural values that you carry from your upbringing or experience into your work?
Just
Any main ones?
just telling the truth, and I think that's something that people not are necessarily afraid to, but well, that's a whole different conversation. I'm not gonna. There's plenty of women here that probably understand better than I ever will about telling the truth and how much of a burden that might be. Even having gone to Pratt, like there are definitely times where I was outspoken about things, but I only felt emboldened by that because I had other black people in my class. I'm sure there's been plenty of times in other people's classes where they didn't have someone that looked like them that didn't make them comfortable enough to speak out against something. But I think if we have more people willing to tell the truth about something, whether it's good or bad, Bill Cosby, whether it's good or bad, tell the entire truth about that person. That's all I really have ever wanted to do.
Yeah, the truth is really rare, and especially, you know, as society, you know, as like the future comes on, like the truth is gonna keep getting like
Falsified.
falsified.
Yeah.
There's new methods for falsifying truths or histories or changing history as it's unfolding.
Right. Actually, to cut you off,
Yeah.
I am also a professor, if people don't know that. I'm teaching art history, so like talking about David Driscoll, this just came into my mind. That was something that David Driscoll cared about more than anything because he was talking about the fact that like black men and women, if we're doctors, lawyers, all these different things, no matter what, these history books are not going to be written by us. So you can make all the strides in the world if you want to, but if you don't make a cultural impact, that thing is probably not going to be passed down to anybody, unfortunately. So art and things that move people and like being an orator, like the history of like orators in black culture or like indigenous cultures, those are the things that are going to impact people. So again, remaining true and telling the truth is what we have to do because we're not going to be writing the history books anyways. So you have to find different ways to get your truth out there and share that with people.
That's great. So I feel like in the last few questions that we've spoken about, you deal with a lot of really serious ideas or issues that Black people face. You deal with a lot of, you know, problems that society faces, and you think about that really critically in your work. You find visual methods to communicate that. I'm sure that these issues or ideas are always on your mind. How do you not let yourself get overwhelmed or like bogged down by it?
I don't have another choice. I mean, again, like I said, how many of you like in here are affected by Roe versus Wade? Like, are you gonna? If I thought about that every day, all day, I would kill myself. If I thought
Right.
about the shit that I had to deal with every day, all day, I wouldn't make it. So, like, I have to find moments of joy, and that's, again, you know, thanks to Toni Morrison, I'm able to do that. Reading Song of Solomon, like, she helped me and so many other black young boys in that book, like, by itself, you know, The Bluest Eye, Sula, all these different things. We had these people, again, who is not a lawyer, not a doctor. Her impact will be here forever. And that's the same thing I'm trying to do, just find a way to give these people some bit of escapism, but also telling the truth at the same time. You can't run away from things, but you don't have to sit up there and pine over it all day, every day. You're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. And that's another great commonality with the work that you make. It's like, oh, on one hand, you have this gorgeous representation of one of your favorite sports legends, but on the other hand, you are making a bigger commentary on some of these elements of human life and human relationships.
Yeah.
Cool. So I have a more thought-provoking question for you. So why should someone who doesn't like or know about sports at all care about your work?
Because it looks good.
Because it looks
I mean,
good?
if nothing else, it looks good.
Yeah.
And it's me.
Right.
You have to be some level of a narcissist to make any type of art. I mean, I definitely love myself. It wasn't, you know, this is a labor of love, and it's a way of like digging into black culture and like the things that we've looked up to. And I feel like, again, that stuff that gets misconstrued at all times, being in like these academic spaces. I'm supposed to know each and every white artist ever, but I have to explain who Allen Iverson is on a daily basis to people. it's not even about it being fair. It's just annoying. So
Yeah.
that's that.
Cool. I mean, I've always been curious. Like, I was never a big sports fan, but I've always been really drawn to your work. And I think that people who don't necessarily care about sports, I think your work is a good way to start caring about sports and to start recognizing these people and realizing the identities that they carry. Cool. So let's move a bit away from sports and back into your practice. So since graduating from your MFA at Pratt in 2019, you've moved back home to your home state, you started teaching and curating. What have been some of your goals with your work in the last few years? So since graduating.
It was a lot of like, again, trying to find ways to sparse out different histories of my own. Looking more into my dad's history of him playing baseball and like finding out more about the Negro Leagues, which happened to be the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues when I was doing that. Again, finding out falsified information. MLB finally incorporating these records of these Negro League players, but it's still not being completely accurate. And then finding out the way that they, blackball these different players. So again, it's just like finding out these inaccuracies in, American history and trying to not necessarily write them, but just highlight them and highlight the people that found a way to persevere. So again, it's just the same stories for most of Black history, trying to right certain wrongs that aren't mine, but nobody else is going to do it. So.
Gotcha. And you've moved quite a bit in that time period. Like, I know you were in New York, you moved back to Houston, you spent some time in LA, now in Houston again. Yeah. Do you feel like your geographical location or your daily life has an influence over like the sports history, the sports players, or like histories that you're fascinated by? Like, would you say that when you live in New York, you're like thinking about New York history, or like when you're in Houston, you're thinking about more local histories?
Yes and no, because I'll say no for the general answer, but I do know like when I was here, whatever I would listen to definitely mattered by geographically when I'm working on the stuff. So the subject matter, not necessarily, but how I go about making the work, like whether it be the mark making, certain music I'm listening to when I'm making like these heavy marks or just more expressive. And then when it gets to the finer details, I'm listening to like Earth, Wind and Fire, Sade versus, like Wu-Tang previously. So it isn't really the geographical stuff, but the music I'm listening to is kind of influenced by that. So yes and no.
That's pretty interesting, but like specific. I love knowing that about how you make work. Cool. And so are there any goals that you're working on for this year or anything that you're looking forward to?
The Untitled solo show I have with Franchise, it'll probably be at the beginning of next year, and then moving to Los Angeles.
Yes.
And just, actually, I need to grade these presentations. I just remember that tomorrow for my class. Finishing the semester. Amazing. Moving and then working on that solo show. So.
Cool. And I know you have a curatorial practice. You recently curated a group show. Do you sometimes feel like you're also a curator when you're picking these sports moments to present in your artwork? Is that a form of curation to you?
What show did I curate? What show did I curate?
Is it in Detroit?
That was just my show. That was my solo show.
That was your show. Is it in It's in Texas. You curated a group show in Texas.
I did? I might have.
You curated something recently, like June? Last June?
Maybe. I don't remember.
Like, okay, well, yeah.
Did I?
I don't know.
I don't remember. I'm sorry. But to answer your question, can you read the question again?
I was just thinking about how you curate with literal pieces of artwork, and then when you're picking these moments of sports history to portray in your artwork, is that a form of curation as well to you?
Probably.
Yeah.
It's something that is probably subconscious, even though I really hate using that word. But it's just these nebulous things that I'm trying to, not piece together, but find a way for them to make a full sentence. Find a way for them to not ebb and flow, but just what's the word? Circulate. Yeah.
Cool. And then before we wrap up this conversation, I just wanted to go back to this idea and the word devotion because it was one of the first things you mentioned. It's the title of one of your pieces today, and it's one of my most favorite words of all time. Is there anything that you feel devoted to in your art practice?
Just constantly finding different ways to like get to know myself, and then in turn, that's the only way that I can ever really like care for anybody else. So just being open to receive, and then finding ways to return that to people. So I'm devoted to the idea of like just growth, I guess. You know, growth and honesty. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much it.
Are there any ideas that you're devoted to exploring or upholding or pointing out to people?
That I will probably always be making sports-related work, so stop asking me to make other stuff.
Did you just say you're always going to be making sports-related works?
Yes, probably. Like Pusha T.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
These are my Coke bars.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Cool.
Did I curate a shirt last year?
Cool. Do you want to talk about agency and the personal agency that also drives the histories that you're exploring in your work?
Yeah. Well, I think in general, like for me, when I was growing up, I just went to school, church, and was with family. So when I was playing sports, it was the first non-controlled environment. So the idea of me being able to come into my own person in that way, not having to be defined by other people's expectations, having a sister who was really good at sports, so everybody expecting me to play like her or do things like her, or even just my parents expecting me to make straight A's like my sister, and that definitely never happened. But just finding a way to be my own person through the act of using my body, like getting to learn myself, and that's what I feel like has happened for a lot of younger people. Not even necessarily through sports, just the expectations of other people, whether it be parents or society. Finding something you love and like really like diving into it grants you that level of agency.
Great. Cool. Personal agency. Interesting.
Questions?
Are we at time?
I don't know. You want to ask?
It's 4:30. I thought time was at 4:30. But she hasn't signaled us. Should we keep?
Want to open the question now?
Yeah. We're gonna open it up to audience questions if anyone has anything that they would like to ask Bradley. If not, we could keep talking. But
Yeah. All good. If not, I'm.
yeah.
Huh? What about Houston? I'm not the best person to ask about Houston, but it's hot. It's humid. It feels like today every day. I mean, the city of Houston has a super long history. I'll speak more specifically about my HBCU, Texas Southern University, and the John Biggers art department, and how amazing John Biggers was. That's my guy. My man, 1,000 grand. I actually had to film something about a documentary about him recently, but I'll just surmise him. He's, for me, the first artist that I ever saw who actually went to Africa and came back and made work that felt like a map. Because I feel like most black people feel like we are definitely from there, but we have no real like connection unless you are a first generation person. So him using sacred geometry and like all this line work and really like developing the power in hands and labor and depicting that and then showing where that came from was the first person to ever do that to me. So Houston will always, I mean, it's where I'm from, but like to have that connection of like have somebody make me feel less fragmented is invaluable to me. So that's what Houston represents for me. It's like it's my North Star all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I keep asking myself, like, what is the line between, like, leisure and labor? And again, whether it be sports or art, like, you're doing this thing that you've loved your whole life, and it's this fun activity. And is it when you get paid, does that become a job? Or is it when you're drawing and, like, you're letting it flow and you become sentient of the thing that you're doing? Is it now a job? Like, who are we to know? And, like, for us being black people, like, if you look at, looking at the history of the watermelon, like, it being the easiest fruit to grow, but like that makes us lazy. It still takes time to like nurture this land, nurture this fruit, and like, so what is the actual line between what we're doing? And if we're so lazy, why did you get us to do your labor for all those years? So it's just like, what is the actual line between doing something and then when it becomes a job and then like the transitory time in between? You know, Arthur Jaffo said he was talking to Ta-Nehisi Coates' father like a year and a half ago. What did slaves think about in that transitory time in between in the field, like finishing up for the day and like making food? And he said they thought about us. Like, yeah, I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams, but like they still had that 5 to 10 minute period between to be like, damn, I don't have to like look at this overseer for the day. If you talk about working in the fields, everybody thinks those slaves hymns was just about like morale, but it's a call and response to see who's there, who's still alive. I worked a lot in cyanotypes. It's the same thing, the same hot sun that they were like toiling in. I'm recounting those people on those church fans that I made a year ago. So, what is the line between line and labor when you're doing anything? For a lot of people, is probably demarcated by a W-2. But if you're an artist, you don't have those. So, like, what is the actual line between doing something you love versus slaving over something? You know? I guess speaking about autonomy and inbounds, well, I mean, technically everything has some bounds, especially if you're looking at image making, whether it be the frame or like an IG resolution, like what is the size of that? That's a good question, Colin. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it in a timely manner or think of one, but I will. I'll pocket that one.
Cool. You also mentioned that you started teaching. Why did you decide to start teaching?
I wasn't making money, but also I've always wanted to teach. It was the impetus of me getting my MFA, and then I wanted to go back to my HBCU and be able to be essentially like a liaison between these students. And we have a lot of very, very old teachers. So a lot of them, it's not necessarily that they're out of touch, but some do like have a shorter leash with certain stuff. And I was always going back and like talking to the students and just trying to be a buffer in between. And I felt like I wanted to find a way to do what the school did for me. Like I've always said that Dr. Alvia Warlaw, Lehman Green, Jamal Cyrus, Robert Pruitt, all those people, watered a flower that didn't know it needed to be watered. Like I didn't know living in suburban Houston, intermingling with white people all the time. I didn't know that I wasn't really getting to know myself. I didn't know I was like this fragmented person. And then going to the HBCU that my grandmother lived right across from, and then my mom grew up in the projects right behind. My dad lived 5 minutes from there. It's a school they went to, and I said that I was never going to go to TSU because of all these different things that have happened. But it wasn't until I went there that I actually learned to really find a way to love myself and like be told Black history by somebody Black who's been in these spaces that I want to go to. I can see that it's possible. Half the time, these kids just need to know that it's possible. So, and they need to see it from somebody who's not 70 years old. So that's also a major thing.
Cool. If you want to keep talking, I do want to ask one more question just because you mentioned the cyanotypes. And I think that's a really special body of work amongst all the different forms that you experiment with. And you were saying that your decision to work with cyanotypes is partially informed by your awareness of history and working under the sun and thinking about those ideas. What else informs your material choices or the forms in which you make art?
Well, I think the interesting part about a lot of it, like probably like most students finishing school, like you can't afford a whole lot of stuff. So getting like a Jacquard cyanotype off of Amazon is only like 20 bucks. So it was cheap, but also a way to like have a kind of like a replenishable supply of something. And me wanting to work with images, but not necessarily wanting to draw at the time or worrying about getting stuff printed, the resolution with cyanotypes, you can kind of let yourself forget about those limitations, and it can be as big as you want to, as small as you want to. So it was kind of like a multifaceted way of getting around the boundaries that I was stuck in and claiming my own autonomy. That's how you answer that question, Colin. But yeah, it was a way to just get around my limitations, and again, like find ways to connect myself to this history. And then again, you know, the water, blue, indigo, like with black people, that is something that will, like, has been there throughout the annals of history. So it's just, it was a way to get around stuff, but also to find a way to
Great.
ring
Thank
true to that history.
you. Interesting. Yeah, should we wrap or should I keep asking you? I can keep asking you shit, but I'm like, none. But I can keep asking you stuff. Yeah. Cool. I mean, we're just gonna keep chatting because we still have the bandwidth to do that. Maybe we could talk about your devotion piece that you brought to Nada. So it's two players. One of them is kind of patting the other player on the head. It's from 2001 or 2002 All-Star Game. Do you want to speak more about why you wanted to title that moment of sports history with devotion and then, what is it, mischief?
Souls of Mischief. Souls of Mischief. So the title actually evolved. I had done a piece recently, well, a sketch recently from the 1993 NBA draft, and that was initially just called Souls of Mischief because 93 till Infinity is same year. But I liked how this one felt, and I've also felt like it was a part of the devotion series because, again, it's this point of contact, and it's featuring Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan, two of the best at their position of all time. And during the All-Star Game was the only time they've ever been on the same team together. And it's just again, this idea of, like, rooting this other person on and being a fan of them and not being afraid to say that, like, I care about you and I appreciate what you do. And again, like I was saying, it just isn't something that we as black men really get a chance to do in, like, normal everyday life. So it's just highlighting this moment of intimacy in this high-stakes game. It's an all-star game. It's not really that high stakes, but it's just finding a way to, like, kind of break down the wall of, like, certain levels of masculinity, I guess, a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. And I feel like with you back at Nada, showing work with franchise, showing more basketball-related works, you're like a returning veteran player or something to this basketball arts game,
Supermax.
this huge growth that we've seen in the last 5 years. Looking ahead, because you have all your veteran experience, what do you think is going to happen with this intersection of art and basketball?
I'm hoping that, you know, it kind of tails off a little bit, but it's in general it's great that everybody, I'm gonna say everybody, there's a larger influence and it's on people's radar more now, but I just want them to kind of, like, up the level in which they look at it or what they're expecting from it. And that's all I really want, no matter what we're doing going forward, or, like, just in art in general. Like, that's, like, the whole history of art. The longer we do this shit, like, it's gotta be better, and that's my only, like, qualm with a lot of some of this basketball-related work or sports-related work. Just kind of, like, what are we elevating?
Yeah. That's funny. That's such an art history professor way of looking at things, to, like, want progress as this idea develops. I mean, it just seems like people are so happy anytime somebody renders a basketball whichever way. So, you know.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any opinions or predictions for the culture that surrounds baseball? I feel like from a fashion standpoint, we're gonna see the what is it, MBL players become a lot more prominent.
MLB?
MLB
Yeah.
players, yeah.
I mean, I hope so. Like, that's the major problem with baseball. Like, nobody can identify a baseball player. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't even really think people know what Derek Jeter really looks like. I mean, you may if you live in New York, but that's pretty much about it.
Right.
I think whoever is quote unquote the best baseball player doesn't even like doing commercials. So that's MLB's biggest problem. It would be nice if they could cross over a little bit, but that's all the antiquated white history that's going on with baseball. I mean, they don't even like when you hit a home run half the time. So baseball has to deal with a lot of their own checker past before they can even like kind of step into this like, any realm of what we're doing. Actually, the best baseball player in the past year is Japanese, and like Shohei Ohtani is the biggest thing in baseball right now, and like they aren't really doing a whole lot to promote that guy, and there's a reason for that. So
Totally.
I'm hoping that MLB can take some steps, but I'm not really gonna like wait on white people to do anything.
Well, I mean, I think you're in the cultural conversation, and by showing work and by sharing your work, that is a way of helping to introduce these players to a wider audience. So, well, as you saw, Bradley's a really busy man. He's an artist, he's a teacher, he's a curator, he's a collector, he's a researcher, and he deals with a lot of things that all people face, and he captures it in a really thought-provoking and contemporary way in his artwork. Thank you.